Good afternoon. It's Saturday, the 28th of February. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Just days ahead of the controversial address Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to deliver to the U.S. Congress on the Iranian nuclear negotiations, the Obama administration is continuing its offensive against him. U.S. officials say that despite Netanyahu's criticism of the Iranian negotiations, he has never presented an alternative agreement that would be acceptable to him. Another senior Obama official stated that Washington has been very responsible in trying to stitch together an agreement to establish what he referred to as Washington's bottom lines. The source says that American negotiators are sticking to their guns to ensure a good deal and are holding firm to core principles. While he cautioned that there are no guarantees that an agreement will be reached, he said that the talks have advanced substantially and that gaps in the positions have narrowed. When staking out the broad outlines of a proposed deal, he went on to specify a number of examples where Washington is reportedly holding firm, including the demand that Iran significantly reduce the current number of centrifuges that it operates and are stockpiled, as well as the environment in which it would take the hardline Islamic Republic at least 1 year to gather enough fissile material to produce atomic bombs. Iran will not be allowed to develop weapons-grade plutonium at its Arak reactor, said the official, nor use its Fordo nuclear plant to enrich uranium, although this would still leave the Iranians with their Natanz plant, which is capable of enriching uranium at high grades, which could then be used to make nuclear weapons. The White House spokesman has announced Washington's hopes to hold together the coalition of countries working toward the deal with Tehran, while also saying that the Netanyahu visit to Washington is not being viewed as negatively impacting the ongoing negotiations.
I think the short answer to that is I don't think so. And the reason is simply that there is a real opportunity for us here. And the President is hopeful that we are going to have an opportunity to do what is clearly in the best interests of the United States and Israel, which is to resolve the international community's concerns about Iran's nuclear program at the negotiating table. That is part of why we continue to be concerned about this rhetoric that new sanctions should be imposed now, because it would cause that coalition of countries around the world to start to fray. And the truth is that has been critical to our success so far. So we're hopeful that, that we're going to continue to hold this coalition together. We're going to hold Iran accountable, and we're going to engage in negotiations, and we'll see if they're willing to make the difficult decisions necessary to resolve the international community's concerns. And again, what we're aiming for is an agreement that would prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and allow the international community to verify it for themselves.
Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of senators unveiled legislation yesterday that would require a congressional review of any deal that the Obama administration and other Western powers strike with Iran. That measure would mandate that U.S. President Barack Obama submit the text of any pact to Congress and prevent the administration from suspending congressional sanctions against Tehran for a period of 60 days. During that time, the House would hold hearings and have the opportunity to either approve, disapprove, or take no action regarding that agreement. The legislation is a fresh challenge to the president's authority and is likely to prompt Obama to threaten to exercise his executive veto power if it passes. Those leading the efforts to secure this bill into law are Senators Bob Corker of Tennessee and Bob Menendez of New Jersey, who is the chairman and top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. These developments are all occurring as the March 31st deadline for an agreement looms and as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry heads for Switzerland, where he will once again meet with his Iranian counterpart Mohammad Javad Zarif. The European Union is also acknowledging that the negotiations have reached a critical stage, and representatives say that it is imperative that the world powers not miss out on this historic opportunity to reach a deal. Many analysts believe current relations between the U.S. and Israel are at their lowest point ever. IBA's Eli Wogelanter asked Professor Gerald Steinberg of the NGO Monitor what to expect the day after national elections are held on March 17th.
There are clearly two scenarios. Right now, it looks like the most likely is that Mr. Netanyahu will form the next government, and therefore the United States and Israel, Mr. Obama, Mr. Netanyahu, will have to learn to work together again. That's going to be tough to do. But politicians are supposed to be able to do that, to get over the personal issues. And to some degree, they've been careful. So the White House has always said that they will not invite Netanyahu to meet Mr. Obama because of the elections. That's their policy. Okay, one can either sort of blink your eyes and pretend that we're going to accept that or not. But after the elections are over, we no longer have that impediment. And the White House is intelligent enough to realize that here's someone, if it's Netanyahu, that they've got to work with for the next 2 years and find a way to get over all the personal and other issues that are out there. It's not going to be trivial. On the other hand, if it's Mr. Herzog who forms the government, we've got a new slate. It'll be much easier to get over the personal issues. They won't be there. But the substantive, strategic issues are the same. A Herzog-led government is not going to have at all a different perspective on Iran than a Netanyahu-led government. The IDF is the same IDF. The assessments are the same assessments. So it might be easier in terms of the atmospherics to turn a new page with Herzog as prime minister, but they're still going to have to deal with all of those very tough issues. And it's going to require, I think, the United States, after the other issue is going to be what happens with Iran. And in some ways, strategically, that's more important than the results of the Israeli elections, because policies in Israel are not going to change that much on core issues. And if there is an agreement with Iran, then that's something that Israel, the head of the Israeli government and all the decision makers are going to have to decide. Are they going to launch a military attack? That's still on the table. We've heard statements about that. Are they going to accept and make the best and try to adjust towards a nuclear-armed or almost nuclear-armed Iran and therefore change Israeli deterrence policies? Those issues are going to be on the table, and I think they're going to, in the long term, 5 to 10 years out, are going to actually be far more important for Israel, for the Middle East, for American-Israeli relations, and for American interests in the region than the results of the Israeli elections.
So what you're saying is, if it becomes Prime Minister Herzog, that he too could go to Congress in 6 months, make the same speech, the same case, that this deal with Iran is a bad deal.
I can envision Herzog, or perhaps a different combination of people, going to Washington.
Exact same way.
Not in 6 months, but in 3 months or 2 months, depending again on what happens in terms of the negotiations with Iran. The personality issues at the beginning, at least, will not be there. We don't know how those are going to develop. But the substantive problems and perspectives are very important. If there's an image of Herzog as an American liberal in the image of Obama that views the world as basically a friendly place where it's a matter of understanding the suffering and the history of people in ISIS, the type of, or Hezbollah or Iran, that's not going to be a Herzog government. There's no Israeli, a responsible Israeli, who's going to be able to adopt that type of understanding of the world. But that's the dominant one, at least in terms of the president right now that we see, the Obama administration. The friction that exists between Egypt and Washington, and the necessary vital cooperation between Cairo and Jerusalem, those things are going to have to be squared no matter who is sitting in the prime minister's residence here.
Staying with election news, and a violent protest broke out during a campaign visit by Zionist Union leaders Isaac Herzog and Tzipi Livni to the northern Arab town of Wadi Ara today, when a fight broke out between the demonstrators and Arabs who support the party. The protesters reportedly shouted at the two leaders to leave the town and spat at those who defended them. The activists also carried signs branding the Zionist Union as being a radical right-wing faction and accused it of being an enemy of the Palestinian nation. Police forces were at the scene of the scuffle and arrested 3 of the protesters. The former chairman of the Yesha Council of Jewish Communities in Judea and Samaria, Dani Dayan, spoke at this week's 12th annual Jerusalem Conference on Modernity and the State during a panel discussion on how Israel should respond to Palestinian initiatives. Dayan told IBA's Eli Wogelenter that the wrong question is being asked.
Of the panel is what should be Israel's reaction to this or that Palestinian move. I think that we have to erase from our vocabulary the words what should be Israel's reaction and ask what should be Israel's initiative, regardless of what the Palestinians do. But Israeli initiative doesn't mean withdrawals. On the contrary, Israeli initiatives means enhancing Israeli interest, and Israel's interest is to strengthen its hold in Judea and Samaria.
And what would be one example of initiative that you feel that Israel should do?
Well, Israel should make clear that the existing communities in Judea and Samaria, the Jewish communities, are here to stay, and the natural development of the communities, natural growth of the communities is essential to Israel's interests, but also to justice. This offensive of rights, of Israeli rights, of Jewish rights in Judea and Samaria, should be the leading principle of Israel's policy.
Is there any chance for any kind of peace talks leading towards something?
I think that's quite clear to all parties, I mean political parties and international parties, that a negotiated agreement between Israel and the Palestinians is impossible because of the Palestinian intransigency. It's no coincidence that this is not an issue in our electoral campaign, because no matter who will be the prime minister, it's quite clear that an agreement with the intransigent Abu Mazen is completely impossible. If Olmert didn't succeed, of course Herzog will not succeed, and Netanyahu will not succeed. This is a fact.
The Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, known as UNESCO, is condemning this week's destruction of priceless ancient Assyrian artifacts in northern Iraq by Islamic State forces as not only a cultural tragedy, but also a major security issue. Speaking from Paris, Irina Bokova stressed that the attack on the collection of sculptures and statues in Mosul by men armed with sledgehammers and drills was a deliberate attempt to destabilize the country in an attempt to provoke sectarianism.
I think the fact that they want to show that it's a tabula rasa, nothing exists before them. It doesn't matter. There is no culture, there is no history, there is no anything else that existed before. It's intended, and to show it in such a vivid manner, such an appalling, I would say, shocking manner, is precisely they want to create deep divisions, they want to create an atmosphere of fear, an atmosphere where you cannot even think of reconciling cultures and to stir sectarianism in a country.
We ask the Security Council and all the countries of the world to stand with Iraq, to support us with arms, with weapons, as much as the Mosul is occupied or any Iraqi land is occupied, the crimes will continue.
The United Nations Security Council is also strongly condemning the ongoing barbaric terrorist acts by the Islamic State and the deliberate destruction of the irreplaceable religious and cultural artifacts housed at the Mosul Museum, as well as the burning of thousands of books and rare manuscripts from the Iraqi city's library. According to a statement released by the UNSC, other looted cultural items from Iraq and Syria are being sold off to support the group's recruitment efforts and finance its ability to organize and carry out acts of terrorism. Delegates of the 15-member world body reiterated the need to defeat the radical Sunni extremists, underscoring the importance of stamping out the intolerance, violence, and hatred espoused by ISIS. British Prime Minister David Cameron declined to comment on this week's identification of the Islamic State executioner, Jihadi John, as Mohammed Emwazi, but he did vow to do everything he possibly can to track down those who have committed appalling crimes against British citizens.
When there are people anywhere in the world who commit appalling and heinous crimes against British citizens, we will do everything we can with the police, with the security services, with all that we have at our disposal to find these people and put them out of action. That is the #1 priority for me.
British newspapers have published a photograph of Emwazi taken when he was a schoolboy sitting on the grass at the St. Mary Magdalene Church of England primary school in Maida Valley, West London. Many question how many British youth have adopted radicalized jihadi positions, and Britain's most known radical Muslim preacher, Anjem Chowdhury, has followers who have been connected to a number of terrorist plots. He denies knowing Emwazi and placed the blame for extremist youth on biased media as well as American and British foreign policy in the Middle East.
I know I want to condemn. I want to condemn you guys for being the tongue of the biggest terrorists in the world, who are the Americans, and their own allies, the British. You're the ones who have the blood of hundreds of thousands of people in your hands, and yet you can't see it. You are deaf, you are dumb, you are blind, and you point the finger at the Muslims. Now the Muslims are rising up. You're saying, who radicalized them? Well, when the only weapons of mass destruction you found in Iraq were the ones your government dropped themselves on the head of the Muslims, I think that tells you the story about who actually radicalized the Muslims.
In other regional news, Egyptian security officials say that a senior military officer was killed and another wounded when a cross-border smuggling tunnel with the Gaza Strip collapsed after troops entered it to investigate. According to the sources, the exit of the passageway was discovered yesterday near intelligence headquarters on the Egyptian side of Rafah, originating in Gaza on the other half of the divided Palestinian border town. Egypt is in the process of clearing Palestinian homes from the area to create a buffer zone with Gaza as part of its strategy to smash the underground networks that are operated by Hamas. Israel's first female Christian Arab member of Knesset died at the age of 61 and was laid to rest yesterday. Nadia Hilu was 15th on the Labour Party list when she entered Knesset in 2006 and headed the Committee on the Rights of the Child. She was a social worker by profession and died after a long struggle with an unspecified severe illness. She was buried at St. Anthony's Church in Jaffa yesterday and is survived by her husband and 4 daughters. Zionist Union leader and former Labour Party chief Isaac Herzog conveyed his condolences to her family and said that we are all filled with sorrow and grief as we mourn Nadia Hilu, who passed away before her time and will be remembered for her fight on behalf of the non-Jewish sectors of this country. 70 years after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism remains a particularly sensitive issue in Germany amid the recent severe spike in anti-Jewish hostility throughout Europe. Speaking on the sidelines of this week's Jewish Youth Congress in Berlin, the leader of the Jewish community in Germany said that the situation has become so hostile, there are parts of the country where religious Jews should not wear traditional skull caps, known as kippahs in Hebrew, especially in areas with large Muslim populations.
I don't think that it is a no-go area for Jews in Germany, but I think that in big cities like Berlin, like Frankfurt, there are parts of the city where it's not very good to show that you are a Jew because you have a kippah or something like this. I don't think it's a rising, it's a new quality, and especially from Muslim people, not all Muslims, but part of the Muslim peoples, young people, where we see there is quite a lot of anti-Semitism.
Russia's top investigative body is today looking into several possible motives for the murder of prominent opposition figure Boris Nemtsov, including an attempt to destabilize the state, Islamist extremism, the Ukraine conflict, or the victim's personal life. A statement from the investigators failed to address the possibilities seen as the most likely by many of Nemtsov's supporters that he was killed for being one of President Vladimir Putin's most adamant, outspoken, and visible critics. The 55-year-old politician was gunned down last night around midnight as he walked across a bridge near the Kremlin with a female companion just hours after denouncing Putin's policies as mad and aggressive during a radio interview, and just one day before he was set to lead a rally against Russian actions in Ukraine and the economic crisis at home. Organizers have canceled that rally and are now calling for a demonstration to mourn Nemtsov on Sunday in central Moscow. The city has granted swift approval for that gathering, in contrast with its usual slow end grudging permission for the holding of opposition rallies. Returning home, and if you drive your own car here in the country, you'll want to pay attention to our next story. There are only a few more hours to fill up your tanks at the gas station before prices are set to increase sharply by 6.25% at midnight tonight. That means that you'll be paying 6 shekels and 46 agarot per liter for 95 octane fuel at the self-service pump tomorrow. The increase is being attributed to the 23% rise in oil prices this past month on world markets. Most of us really enjoyed that 5-year low in gasoline prices that we've seen since the start of the month after a significant drop in prices over the past few months. The world is today mourning the passing of American Jewish cultural icon Leonard Nimoy, who died at the age of 83 following a recent illness linked to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Nimoy began his career as an actor, film director, poet, singer, and photographer at the age of 8 in children's theater, but he will forever be linked to his role as the half-human, half-Vulcan Dr. Spock in the original Star Trek series that ran on television in the late 1960s, as well as the Starship Enterprise many spin-off programs, films, and video games. Leonard Simon Nimoy was born to an Orthodox Jewish immigrants from Ukraine, and his first language was Yiddish. Nimoy said that he came up with the idea of the famous Vulcan greeting on Star Trek by mimicking the priestly Kohanim blessing that he saw performed at the Orthodox synagogue he attended while growing up. He was very active in the Jewish community and involved in several documentaries and photographic studies exploring religious topics. Nimoy's former colleague, William Shatner, who played Captain James Kirk and is also Jewish, today mourned his friend, posting on Twitter that he loved him like a brother and that his humor, talent, and capacity to love will be deeply missed. The IBA weather team says that we can expect clear to partly cloudy skies and no significant change in temperatures tomorrow. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Laura Cornfield will be here tomorrow to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a wonderful week and shalom from Jerusalem.